Great. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Good afternoon and welcome. We are very excited to have you all here as we officially launch the project Resisting Pension Fund Capitalism, along with the new website for the Financialization Research Lab. The Resisting Pension Fund Capitalism project represents several years of dedicated research and collaboration. Thank you to all participants for being a part of this important event. We look forward to a panel of informative presentations and meaningful dialogue. My name is Lauren, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm a first-year master's student here at the Institute of Political Economy, and I'm a research assistant at the Financialization Lab. The organizers would like to begin this event by acknowledging and honoring the treaty agreements and unceded lands of Turtle Island. Land on which we learn, work, play, grow, and live is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Since time immemorial, the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples have stewarded the lands, waters, and rich cultural life of this region. As a part of honoring this territory, we encourage all attendees to seek out the work and voices of Indigenous peoples, learn about the territories that we each occupy, and take action in support of Indigenous self-determination and sovereignty. The co-sponsors of today's event are the Financialization Research Lab at Carleton University and GRAIN, collaborating on what they refer to as the Resisting Pension Fund Capitalism project. As organizers, we also want to thank our partners and supporters, PSI Americas, CUPE, and the Institute of Political Economy at Carleton University. I'll now turn it over to Kevin. Kevin Skurett is an adjunct research professor at the Institute of Political Economy and the director of the Financialization Research Lab here. He previously spent 30 years working as a pension researcher at CUPE.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone in the room. I have a number of friends, colleagues, long-time past colleagues who have joined today, and I want to welcome everyone online. Very exciting and important, interesting news. We had, as people know, this is an international event being interpreted into 3 languages. So bear with us with the logistics and the sound. If you could keep the noise in this room lower, that might help. We had almost 200 people in different countries register for the event, and we've got over almost 90 tuned in on the Zoom. So it's very exciting. And I'm going to say a few words, just introductory, before we get to the panel. And we will try to make sure that everyone is muted. If I could just repeat the advice, try to mute yourselves when not speaking. That's for everyone online. So I want to one word of substance to try to kick off this discussion. First of all, I want to thank Devlin Kuyek and GRAIN, the NGO, the food security NGO GRAIN. I got to know Devlin and colleagues at GRAIN several years ago. They were very interested in the work that I had been working on in relation to pension funds, privatization, and financialization. They look at it from a food security perspective. And my interests are sort of across the board. We worked together to put together a workshop series on these themes in 2022 and committed to picking up that work as soon as possible. And what that meant was, for me, once I was finished my work at CUPE and relocated here to the Institute of Political Economy at Carleton, I've been able to, with support from Justin Paulson, the director of the Institute, and other colleagues and graduate students here, been able to establish this new, still relatively new, Financialization Research Lab and pursue this project with GRAIN, which we call the Resisting Pension Fund Capitalism Project. So that's where this panel today fits into. This is a first really public session and meeting that's picking up the thread and pursuing this work. So we have a panel of speakers, which Lauren will introduce in a moment. But before turning to the panel, I do want to sort of kick off the discussion with a few words about this concept, this term, pension fund capitalism and what purpose it serves. And maybe first of all, it's worth acknowledging that we are living in really difficult, dire times. We've got accelerating imperial violence, genocide, and a trade war, not just in North America, but in other places, a housing crisis, multiple crises, and climate crisis, all converging and accelerating. The point I want to make in relation to this is that private finance and private financial capital is involved in these crises. And pension funds are part of that private financial sector. So that is the thread I want to draw. Now, I want to make a conceptual point. What you're going to hear about, I should go from my script and not ad lib. I know from the registration list and from the group gathered that many of you are at least somewhat familiar with this topic. But I want to start off by saying that some of what we're going to hear today is going to talk about the activities of aggressive and predatory pension funds and pension fund investors. And I want to set the stage for this panel by jumping straight to a kind of a concluding point. Private pension funds themselves and the asset managers that they hire are, I want to argue, in their essence, capitalist financial institutions, not social service organizations, not charitable trusts. They are capitalist financial institutions. So there's a number of students of political economy in the room. They know that capitalists are legally and institutionally structured to seek to maximize their profits, their rate of return, while minimizing or otherwise managing the financial risks that they face. Now, the reason that this is a politically confusing configuration is the simple fact that there is a kind of contradictory class dynamic in play here, in that it is, generally speaking, real workers who are the beneficiaries of this profit making. Pension fund profits are now central to the security and sometimes even the improvement of workers' pension incomes at or after retirement. That is, for those workers who have pensions or financial savings of some sort. But as we're about to hear, that financial profit making is generally coming at the expense of other workers, through the exploitation of the other workers, their dispossession, and through a kind of new enclosure movement that undermines the public services, the infrastructure, and the very ecological foundations that all workers and all people depend on. I want to argue that this is an uncomfortable contradiction that is too often made invisible or avoided, even within the labor movement. I could say especially within the labor movement. But then this raises the question, what would it look like to really grapple with and ultimately resolve this contradiction? In many ways, for me, this is the central open question of the work that I'm doing and that I think this project aims to pursue. I want to suggest that we keep this contradiction in our mind as we hear our three presentations today, and hopefully we can take it up further in our discussion period and maybe future such meetings. That's my introductory comment. Just to kick things off, I now would like to take a quick moment to introduce a colleague who's also, I believe, in Sao Paulo. That's Ewan Gibb, now a longtime colleague. I met Ewan back in 2009. He is a longtime trade unionist, originally from Canada, now the Regional Secretary for Inter-America at Public Services International, PSI, based in Sao Paulo. He is a very valuable champion and supporter of the Resisting Pension Fund Capitalism project and the work we are doing here. And Ewan has offered to share a few words as part of this introduction. So Ewan, if you're able.
Right on. Thanks a lot, Kevin. Great to see you. Kevin, congratulations on the event and congratulations on the consolidation of the creation of the Financialization Research Lab. What a pleasure to see this even from a distance, that this is off the ground, this is getting consolidated, and it's got huge support, Kevin. To see the level of interest is really, really encouraging. Yeah, I guess I do still identify as Canadian. Born in Scotland, became a trade unionist in Canada. Last November, my Brazilian citizenship was granted, so I've got the three passports now. I'm based here in Sao Paulo in Brazil in the regional office of Public Services International. The regional office is for Inter-America. So that's for us here in PSI from the top of Canada down to the bottom of Argentina. PSI is a global union federation founded in 1907, headquartered in Geneva. We represent about 30 million workers from a little over 300 affiliates in 154 different countries around the world. In Canada, our most important affiliates are CUPE, NUPG, SCIU, FIC, the Nurses Union in Quebec, PSAC. Very quickly, any of you that are in the capital region in Ottawa, please organize a solidarity caravan down to Kingston University. There's a group of PSAC members, the staff at Queen's University, that are on strike right now. So please, if you can organize any kind of support for those sisters and brothers, siblings there, please go ahead. Look, PSI, of course, as you can imagine, we've been organizing fights, collective fights against privatization for decades, right? This is about quality public services. This is about defending democracy, as you can see in its most raw and clear form in the United States right now. These direct attacks on democratic institutions. It's our affiliates in the U.S. And unions in the private sector that are on the front lines of this fight. Exactly the reason that we're under attack so consistently, not only in the U.S. but beyond. I want to be really clear that PSI's involvement in this theme, in this event, this partnership with the Financialization Research Lab, is about a class analysis about how global capitalism is organized. This is not about, we think if we mess, tinker a little bit and adjust a little bit how these funds work, then capitalism, we can find a better model of capitalism that's less exploitative. No, it's actually quite the contrary for us at PSI. Look, globally and in the region here, we've accompanied this growth of dramatic growth, really, of public and private funds being increasingly involved in privatization of water, energy, sanitation, and in fact, increasingly recently in the health sector as well. So not only the kind of historic sectors, but we're seeing actually growth into new areas as well. And so this is something where we're organizing collective fights on the ground, and we need to really be clear about the necessity of doing this internationally. And this is why I say it's about a class analysis of where we fit in capitalism, and we fit in different places many times in the North, in the South. My first direct involvement with this kind of fight was during Bolsonaro's mandate here in Brazil, when he worked with a conservative governor in the state of Rio de Janeiro to impose illegally a privatization of the public water system in the city of Rio de Janeiro. And this is not like privatize the whole water system. What they do is they cut off the profitable pieces and put them into little parcels and sell them off on the market, right? Sell off running them in the market. And so we had a local affiliate that represented those water workers that came to us at PSI and said, hey, we need support, because we've discovered that one of the bidders, one of the participants in the auction for our public water system here, the profitable parts of our public water system here, is the Canadian Pension Fund. And I said, wait, I know those guys in Canada. I can help with that. And so we get in touch with our Canadian affiliates, with Kevin, with other allies in Canada. And we say, look, we really need some help to put some pressure there on the CPP in Canada. How do we build a fight to do this? And it felt to me really ad hoc. And it became really clear to me that we need to organize this fight. We need to organize and structure so that we're not fighting for the first time every time something like this happens. We need to have already an analysis and a strategy, and yeah, I'll slow down. An analysis and a strategy and these alliances already established, which is one of the reasons, Kevin, where I go back to saying congratulations, because this lab really is a hub in the construction of this alliance so that we're better prepared and so that we're not getting organized for the first time every time something like this happens. And look, it's possible to win. One of the examples that I highlighted during the fight to preserve the public water system in Rio was that during Trump's first mandate, when the US government was putting those children in cages, right, in prisons, the Canada Pension Fund managers, they said, we're dumping all the stocks in these private prisons because of reputational risk. And so they might follow their rules internally and say fiduciary duty is our priority, and we're always going to make investments that give the best returns and the most secure returns on our investments. But it's a lie, and we know it's a lie. And so there are ways, even without changing any kind of structure, there are ways that we can win. Randy Weingarten, who's the president of one of our biggest US affiliates, the American Federation of Teachers, AFT, is politicizing this model of capitalism and saying we should all dump Tesla stock. Look at all our pension funds that have investments in that stock. It's time to dump it. And so here's another example of strategies that have bubbled up organically. And so what's missing really for me is this kind of structuring of the fight. And for me, it's clear in my introduction when I said, it's clear to me when I said in my introduction, we are many times we find ourselves in different places at different connections and different junctures in the circuits of global capitalism. And that means we have different roles to play. That's great. There's a diversity of fronts in all of these fights. We're fighting directly on the ground in the legislature and in the community with community allies in Rio, for example, against that privatization fight, while people are knocking on politicians' doors and trying to get access to the CPP investment board, for example, in Canada. So you have different fronts in the same fight. And for me, that means that we can really get beyond a charity approach to international solidarity. Our role here on the ground is different than someone who's in the north. And that's great. That's complementary. And that needs to be clear that we're in different places. And so we play different roles. And it's not about sending money or sending solidarity or letters down to those poor workers in the global south. No, it's about taking responsibility in the north for what's being done in your name. And so how do we do that in a collective way that's in accordance with the fight that's happening on the ground? That specifically is what I look forward to contributing to and to building jointly with Kevin and the comrades who are involved at the Financialization Lab, but with all of you that are here present. So solidarity greetings from here in Sao Paulo, and looking forward to the discussions. Thanks a lot, Kevin.
A couple audio and technical difficulties. I will take this time to introduce the speakers that we have on our panel. So first we have Jason Ward of SICTAR. Jason Ward is the principal analyst at the Center for International Corporate Tax Accountability and Research, SICTAR. He holds a master's in development studies and specializes in corporate transparency and tax issues. Jason is widely known for his in-depth corporate research and studies of corporate tax evasion. Next, we have Levi Gerbase also from SICTAR. Levi is a researcher for Latin America and the Caribbean at SICTAR. She holds a master's in international political economy and specializes in fiscal and tax justice, tax incentives, public policy evaluation, and energy transition. Levi is known for her recent research on the Canadian company Brookfield Asset Management. Next, we have Marco Kremerman from Fundación Sol. Marco Kremerman is a researcher and economist at the Fundación Sol, a social and labor issues think tank based in Chile. He holds a master's degree in labor studies and specializes in social policy, inequality, and pensions. Marco is widely known in Chile as one of the leading critics of the country's ultra-neoliberal Pinochet-era pension system. So I'll turn it over to you, Jason.
Excellent. Can everybody hear me? Excellent. Thank you very much for inviting me, and huge congratulations to Kevin for getting the Financialization Research Lab up and running. And I'm super excited to do what I can to contribute to the Resisting Pension Fund Capitalism project. I'll start off by saying I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Darug people, more commonly referred to as the Blue Mountains, which is a couple hours outside of Sydney, Australia. So I'm going to give I'll first explain who the hell Siktar is, and give you some context before I jump into the meat of my presentation. So Siktar has been around now for about 7 years, with generous support from PSI and lots of affiliates in Canada, the US, Australia, Europe. We try to focus on helping unions around the world use the exposure of multinational tax avoidance as a tool to win in their fights, whether that's organizing, bargaining, or policy changes. And we also try to bring the energy and the institutional power of unions around the world to fight for fairer tax systems and adequate funding for public services all around the world. So that's in short who we are and what we try to do. So just a bit of context before I get into discussing our report that we released with CUPE late last year on Orpea, which after Scandal has rebranded under a different name. But it was and continues to be the largest care home elder care operator in Europe. It was a publicly listed company, and its largest shareholder for over a decade was CPPIB, the largest public pension fund in Canada. So just a few background comments on pension funds in Canada. So I'm sure that most of the people listening already know about CPPIB and about the Canadian pension fund system, but this is workers' deferred income. This is retirement savings of workers. In the case of CPPIB, 22 million workers in Canada have their retirement savings in that fund. Canada has a pension fund system which in some ways is in a similar stage to Australia in that it's in a rapid accumulation phase. It is taking in more money than it is distributing out to beneficiaries. And given that, it has a huge need to find a place to put its capital. And we're seeing that capital being put in places that are not what the pension funds claim to be, long-term responsible investors, but in private equity style investments in financialization that is purely extractive. It's not investing in increasing productive capacity. It's investing in extracting short-term profits at huge costs to societies around the world. And this is not sustainable, nor responsible. And the example I'm going to give you is a full throttle drive towards financialization. This investment should not have been made, but it also, in this particular case, it lost over $500 million of workers' retirement savings by putting that money into a bad choice of investments that was socially destructive. And then completely mismanaged. So I'm going to come back and explain that in more detail. But we come across Canadian pension funds all around the world, and my colleague Livy in Brazil is going to talk about some of the Latin American experiences there. But Canadian pension funds are tax-free in Canada, and what we found is that they try to make their operations on private corporations around the world tax-free as well. They go through great lengths to avoid paying tax on income earned outside of Canada on all of their investments. And we've looked at numerous investments, and all of them are structured so as to avoid tax in the countries where they're generating profits. And obviously that's a huge problem in countries that are struggling to find finances to fund public services. There are some areas that I hope that Grain and the Financialization Research Lab can come back to. And Canadian pension funds are massive investors in water rights around the world. So looking to capitalize on water becoming a scarce asset and not a human right. So I think this is an area that I hope to sort of come back to and research. So agricultural land and water rights around the world are being bought up rapaciously by Canadian public pension funds. And I don't have time to give you examples, but there are plenty. I'll just mention one other investment, that is CPPIB and BCI, the British Columbia Investment Fund, are now about to be each 12% shareholders in one of the world's largest food commodity traders, a company called Bunge. And this company and about 4 other peers can control the price of world food, grain, basic grains, sugar, wheat, rice around the world. And this is a huge danger to society to have that kind of monopoly power and to have Canadian pension funds have controlling interest in that investment. So let me jump back into some broader work to set the context for the Orpea case. So we have done a significant amount of work in other Canadian pension funds investment in the care sector. In particular, we focused on Revera, which is a company that people might have heard of. It was the 3rd largest or one of the top operators of long-term care facilities in Canada. And we, working with our Canadian union partners, exposed that it was tax dodging on its investments in the care home sector in the UK, which it has now disposed of. And it has disposed of operating assets in Canada as well. So now only owns the real estate through which it continues to extract massive profits and which continues to undermine the services provided by the operators that are contracted to run the facilities that it owns. There is another scandal that I think I would love to expose if our Canadian union partners want to go there in the near future. But I will refrain from remarking on that at this point. I should just say that I think Ewan mentioned this in his remarks that there's a long-term investment in physical infrastructure, in privatization of public assets, water, electricity. But public pension funds are investing in what they term as social infrastructure, which is our healthcare systems, our elder care systems, and our child care systems, our disability services, and other things. And they view this as a ripe investment opportunity because it's a steady flow and a rising flow of public money and government services. And there is an explicit investment analysis here that they can benefit from those services that are funded by governments around the world. So this is social infrastructure investment. And in our view, it's something that shouldn't happen. It should be a public service and delivered for public good and not a profit extraction opportunity. But we're far past preventing that. And this is alive and well around the world with huge pension funds investments in these social services. So I mentioned the case of Revera. I'll just throw out a few other investments of major Canadian pension funds. So in addition to what I'll be focused on, Orpea and CPPIB, the PSP fund was the 100% owner of Revera, still owns 100% of it. They were the largest shareholder in the 2nd largest French care home company called Corian. It's now rebranded again following a scandal as Clarion. The Ontario Teachers Pension Plan owns Busy Bees, which is probably, well, it's the largest early childhood education and care company in the United Kingdom, the largest in New Zealand, and one of the largest in Australia. Again, privatizing childcare and extracting huge profits out of it. And CDPQ, the Quebec pension fund, is a large shareholder in the 4th largest care home company in Europe called Groupe Colisée. So there are plenty of others. CDPQ also owns the wonderful company G4S, which is part of a larger private security prison operating company called Allied Universal. CDPQ in Quebec is also a major investor with DP World, controlled by the Dubai's royal family and one of the world's largest port operators. Anyway, I'm going to return back to my main subject here, which is the Orpea report. So as I mentioned, it was the largest care home operator in Europe, based in France, publicly listed. It had, at its peak, 1,100 facilities in 23 countries with 110,000 beds. For comparison, for our Canadian comrades, that's about 4 times larger than Chartwell's, which is the largest company in that sector in Canada. This is a massive company. CPPIB made its investment in the company in 2013 and came in as the largest shareholder and acquired 25% of the voting rights and 2 seats on the board. We, at SICTAR, we began looking at Orpea at the request of the 2 largest French trade union federations, CGT and CFDT, because the company was epitomizing the abuse and the financialization of services in the care sector and was viciously anti-union, including installing a phony company-dominated yellow union. Thankfully, that has now been overturned and there's a real union in there. And so the crisis of Orpea started with a major expose by a prominent French journalist called Victor Castanet, who published a book called The Gravediggers. And that exposed the sort of vicious treatment of elders in the Orpea system in France in particular. And it became a national scandal. It was a huge scandal in France. But the fact that the sort of Canadian ownership and Canadian control and Canadian influence of this really never crossed over into Canada. So the story didn't come back to Canada, where there was responsibility for the shameful management and oversight of this company. CPPIB's investment in this company coincided with increased financialization. It entered a period of rapid expansion, huge debt in order to buy more real estate and focusing on the real estate expansion. And that focus pulls away money from frontline care. And so the company cries poor about not having adequate money to pay workers decently or to hire staff, because all of its money is going into capital and real estate in order to make profits from the capital gains of the real estate, rather than operating a reasonable care business. I'm very proud to say that this is one of the few union campaigns I've worked on over several decades in which the CEO and CFO did jail time. So the French government cracked down on this company and went into detailed investigations, and literally the CEO and CFO were put into jail. So we launched this report that I'm focusing on now to bring the story to Canada and to highlight CPPIB's role. We launched this report, which I put in the chat here, a link to it, and it was covered in the Toronto Star in late last year. And, you know, workers in Canada lost $500 million because the company failed to use its rights and responsibilities as directors of this company to stop the decline of the company. And when they ultimately sold out and divested from the company, the loss over the life of the investment, was $500 million, over $500 million Canadian dollars. They had a seat on the audit committee, and there was criminal conduct going on that we exposed in our first report that they failed to do anything about in their position as directors and owners of this company, did nothing to protect the integrity of the company, nor the assets, the deferred savings of 22 million Canadian workers. And again, I think I said this already, but we believe, and there's evidence to show that it was CPPIB's investment that actually pushed this financialization strategy, that pushed excessive debt, expansion, and growth at the cost of services to the people that it was intended to serve. And this is a business that was charging huge amounts of private fees, but also fundamentally based upon getting public dollars in order to provide services to elderly residents in France and frankly, all across Europe. Orpea briefly did expand into Latin America and did expand into China. I think most of those assets have been sold off as the company collapsed and ultimately was bailed out by a French government investment fund that took over more or less at the time that CPPIB sold out its interest at a huge loss. So let me just wrap up by saying that CPPIB has never publicly acknowledged its failure in Orpea. No one has been held accountable. All of the people who were involved in this investment from CPPIB have magically disappeared into the woodwork. None of them are remaining at CPPIB. And if we don't highlight this example, it's bound to happen again, right? Not just with CPPIB, but with all of the Canadian public pension funds who are aggressively pursuing these types of investments all around the globe. So I think it's very much time that we kind of highlight this story, use it as an example and a warning that this is going to happen again. People are going to lose their money and invest in things that don't produce a positive social good here. These are really purely extractive, destructive investments. And in this case, losing money, large amounts, hundreds of millions of dollars in workers' retirement savings. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. We're going to turn it over to Livy now.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Fine? Yes. I'll share my screen then. Opa, this is the end. Are you guys seeing my presentation? Yes? Okay, so I'll start. Thank you so much, Kevin and the lab for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here with all these amazing speakers to talk about a little bit about Canadian's pension fund model and how it is reaching here Latin America. My name is Livy. I'm a researcher at SICTAR with Jason, and I look more specifically into the Latin America and Caribbean region. I'm Brazilian, based in the capital of Brazil. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Brazil, but our first study in SICTAR, our first research in SICTAR was about Isagen, a Colombian company, and I'm going to present this research to you today. So I don't want to talk about what has already been said, so I'm going to skip more briefly into this first part, because I think most of you know that we are in a world where a small number of companies and individuals are controlling everything more and more. So I brought a little bit of data on that. For example, 26% of total household wealth in Canada is owned by the top 1%. We have pension funds that we are discussing here today. They are holding, 22 pension funds are holding 56 trillion assets in the world. 4 companies control 70% of the grain markets. And private equity funds, which are one of the most aggressive ones in terms of profit extraction, they already own 1 in 3 for-profit hospitals in the United States. So it's a huge trend. Normally, in Latin America, we talk a lot about privatization and what it means, but we have to go a couple of steps more in these neoliberal times to say that it's actually a monopolization. It's just a handful of companies, and these companies are increasingly financialized. So they're owned by hedge funds, by pension funds, by private equity, by investment funds in general. So I think this is a little bit of what we are. and how Canada fits into this. This also has already been said by Kevin, by Ewan, and by Jason. I just wanted to say that it's something that Canada has been exporting to the world, this idea that pension funds can be more risky, because normally we have, for example, pension funds in Brazil. Here, for example, FGTS has its own investment fund, but normally they were risk adverse. They were in assets that were less risky, like more direct treasury bonds, for example. But what we have been seeing with this pension model is a more active, direct, looking for risk kind of investments. And of course, with the de-risking, like leaving to the government to do the de-risking of the investments. And as Jason said, they are massive investors in mining, in water, in agriculture. They do these in-house investments in which they're not, for example, BlackRock are always buying 5%, 6% of a company. These pension funds, normally they want to do a private equity model in which they buy more than 50% of the company, so they can have full control and they can take as much profit as quickly as possible. Very large scale with asset diversification, so they are in lots of different sectors. But particular in public utilities and real estate, because they have this fixed demand. They are always rising up. They're not as volatile to shocks. And normally they have their demand, for example, for water energy, the demand is already there. So they like this kind of investments. And the geographical diversification, they are all around the world. And they have strong lobby activities around the world. For example, the Global Infrastructure Investor Association is a huge lobbying company that helps the pension funds in Canada. This I took from Kevin's presentation, a part of it, so I want to emphasize how important his research is for us to think about Canada pension models all around the world. I wanted to bring a little bit about the lack of transparency in Canada's financial accounts. So Canada's standard for financial reporting are lower than some tax havens, if you can imagine. And they are generally lower than Europe in general. Europe requires that any company that has 5 million in annual revenue, they have to disclose financial results. They have to undergo annual audits. That's not the case for Canada. In Canada, if you are not on a stock exchange, you don't have to disclose anything. If you are in the US stock exchange, you can disclose only there and not on Canada. So this is a huge problem, because we don't see, and most pension funds are not, they're not normally in the stock exchanges, in the stock markets, and the companies they buy, since they are buying 50% plus, lots of the times they are private companies. They're not being publicly traded, so they're not in the stock exchange of any countries. So we don't have any disclosure on profits, on salaries, on expenses, on taxes, and we also don't have accountability of these activities around the world. So this leads to increased concentration of wealth and power of these Canadian pension funds that use this lack of transparency to not put any information around about what they are doing. And I think when we went to Canada with this information last year, people were really shocked that Canada was below EU standards, and it really shouldn't be. It has full capacity to implement better disclosure. We talked a little bit about Brookfield already. So it's a company that we have been looking at sector for years now. It is an asset managed funded by Canadian pension funds. So it's not directly a pension fund, but it has a lot of pension fund money. And we found there's research from us, from others, showing how low the effective tax rate is in Canada. They have been paying very little tax. They use a lot of tax havens, mostly in Bermuda, to organize their profits extraction and transfer pricing schemes. But I'm gonna talk a little bit more about Brookfield in Colombia because and this is our first report in Latin America, in Colombia. They bought a company called Isagen, that's the second largest energy company in Colombia in 2016. Actually they bought it, and just a couple of years later it started this big energy crisis in Colombia. So the last couple of years there has been a huge increase in tariffs and increase in blackouts in Colombia, mostly in the coast, close to the Caribbean. But this actually has been great for Isagen and Brookfield because the earnings have increased by almost 200%, and the company is paying a lot in dividends, 3.4 billion COP, pesos colombianos, in dividends for the shareholders. Their shareholders are basically Brookfield because they own 99.7% of the company. So we started looking at this company, and I think this is our main graph, our main find of what the company has been through since privatization. So it was the purchase of Brookfield was in 2016, so this line shows. And this graph shows the distribution of revenue. So what the company is doing with the money it gets from the Colombian payers, consumers. So before the purchase of Isagen, you can see here that it is spending between 40 to 60% of its revenues, of its income in capital expenditures, which are basically investments in the company infrastructure, in the country's infrastructure, maintenance as well. They go to capital expenditures. So they were spending between 40 and 60%. And as you can see, after privatization, they have completely stopped doing any investments. They only had investments in 2021, and clearly a very specific one. But in terms of maintenance, etc., it has almost disappeared. And as you can see, the dividend extraction started, and they are spending 30% just paying dividends of all its revenues. And as you can see, they are starting to pay a lot of debt, like 70% of its revenues are in debt, 50%, 84% of all it's got from revenues, it spent on debt repayments in 2020. So what we did is we investigated this debt, and we found that actually it's inter-party debt. It's debt that Brookfield created with Brookfield in tax havens in Bermuda. So these are the names of the tax havens. As you can see that our evidence shows that they are using this debt with themselves to take money as quickly as possible from Colombia and to pay this huge debt that now they have to. They're paying 40% of all debt, of all this new debt is with themselves, is with tax havens. So it really looks like a profit shifting scheme that is used to reduce tax payments, to reduce the money that is available for salaries and benefits for workers, and also taking money away from Isagen as quickly as possible. So that was what we showed in this report. We launched it in Colombia with the unions of Isagen and the unions of tax authorities. So it shows a little bit of what privatization can do in terms of changing the company's perspectives. A little bit more of Brookfield. So Brookfield in Brazil is very, very big. It has expanded a lot. It has doubled its assets in the last 5 years. This map shows BRK, which is Brookfield in water and sanitation in Brazil. They are in more than half of Brazil. They have more than 100 cities under their control for water and sanitation through BRK. In the infrastructure, they control over 10,000 kilometers of railways, gas pipelines, transmission lines. They are in private equity, buying BRK, Tegra, Aldo Solar, Ouro Verde. They are in energy sector. They are huge in the energy sector, actually, through Elera Renováveis. And in real estate, they're also big, like most big shopping malls in São Paulo and Brazil are controlled by Brookfield. and also business centers in the big capitals in Brazil, big cities in Brazil. So they are spreading a lot in Latin America and in Brazil. And here are some more widely investments from CDPQ in Brazil, CDPQ in Mexico. The Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board is adding 1 billion. I think this is from last year. They're adding 1 billion reais in real estate. So buying a lot of real estate only in Brazil. So you can see how big this is. And one last example is one that was already mentioned by Iwan, because there was a big movement in Brazil through PSI to try and take this, make this not happen. But what happened is that Bolsonaro was really aiming to privatize the whole water and sanitation systems in Brazil. And he managed to do so in a big extent. And this started with the purchase of Iguá Saneamento, the water and sanitation company from Rio de Janeiro, that was bought by two Canadian investment, like CPPIB and AIMCO. And since there, they have already expanded to 5 more states. So this map shows this expansion of Iguá Saneamento since this first purchase. And it's important to understand that the government in Canada encouraged this, not only through the pension plans, but the government in itself. You can see here this news from the government of Canada saying how amazing this new framework that Bolsonaro created was, creates water and sanitation opportunities. So it clearly shows that it is a strategy from the Canadian government to support this and to make sure that Canadian pension funds gets a lot of the concessions that are being sold in Brazil. And 3 years after this, so this was 2021, this news is from the end of last year, and it shows a little bit of what has been going on in Rio's concession. So there's a flood of complaints and lawsuits against the increase in water bills. There was big increases already. And the concessionaries, which include Iguá Saneamento, they are discussing state government compensation because the losses during the pandemic, failure to comply with annual adjustments, etc., etc. So they want more 7 billion reais from the Brazilian government. And they have increased the tariffs. So there are already some problematic things about this concession. So last slide, what can we do about it? I think it's important to understand that it is already possible to do research. That's what the Financialization Lab is all about. And of course, SICTAR as well. So even though sometimes we don't have the specific data on this company, we can find ways around it through subsidiaries around the world. There is this very good database on extractive sector that Canada has. There's also, reach out to the lab, reach out to us, etc. I think because of Canada's role around the world, all private companies in Canada which receive public funding, from the pension fund, the pension funds, should produce clear, consistent, transparent public reports on how this public money is being spent, disclose ownership, disclose the corporate structure, and of course, push for investments, for more responsible investments by the pension funds. So we need broader reforms to mandate tax transparency and responsible business practices in all pension funds that are federally owned, the crown corporations, and of course the corporations that these funds control. So I think there is a way forward, but of course it requires a lot of union between us and action. Thank you so much and look forward to the rest of the panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Livy. That was great. We're going to turn it over to Marco now.
Hello everyone. Muchas gracias por esta invitación, por este importante seminario y por permitirnos también hablar en nuestra lengua nativa, en mi caso en español. Voy a compartir con ustedes una pequeña presentación. Ahí va, ya. Sobre el caso de Chile. A ver, me imagino que todos conocen o han conocido parte de la discusión que existe sobre financiarización. Es una discusión compleja, ¿no? Controvertida, controversial. Eh, Hace 2 años, por ejemplo, se publicó un journal en Cambridge sobre las manifestaciones, las causas, los drivers que explican la financiarización.
Yeah.
En los
Hey,
países... ¿Sí?
Marco, can I stop you? Lo siento, I just want to check if everyone online is receiving the English interpretation. No problem. Okay. No, it's okay. So we will just ask Marco to begin again. Gracias.
Sí.
Marco, can you just start again? I'm sorry, lo siento.
No problem. Thank you very much, Kevin. Bueno, retomando, mencionaba que la discusión sobre la financiarización. Ah, Algo ocurre que yo escucho la traducción inmediatamente.
Hola Marcos, si tú
Ok.
desactivas su interpretación, yo creo que resuelve.
Spanish. Ok. Creo que ahora sí estamos bien. Puse en modo español mi Zoom. Ok. Retomo nuevamente y agradeciendo a quienes han organizado este importante seminario, este importante evento. Les mencionaba que hace un par de años se publicó un journal en Cambridge sobre las manifestaciones, las causas y los drivers que explican la financiarización en países emergentes, en desarrollo, o también podríamos denominarlo como países periféricos, semiperiféricos. Hay una discusión muy importante sobre capitalismo financiarizado, financiarización subordinada, que es controversial, ¿no? Hay distintas teorías sobre aquello, distintas interpretaciones, pero creo que es importante mencionar que la discusión y la presentación sobre un país como Chile es la presentación de un país que está en una posición en el sistema mundo periférica o semiperiférica, subordinada, ¿no? Y es por eso que es tan importante, junto con estudiar las manifestaciones, las causas y los drivers que explican la financiarización, también poder estudiar los movimientos antisistémicos, ¿no? Los movimientos que resisten o que confrontan a lo que podríamos denominar, en este caso, ciñándonos al título del seminario, como capitalismo de los fondos de pensión. Discusión que se ha extendido a capitalismo de los asset managers, incluso sociedades de asset managers, entre otros, en distintos autores. En ese sentido, quisiera mostrar solo este esquema para poder plantear lo siguiente. El modelo de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo para poder caracterizar un sistema de pensiones básicamente reconoce un pilar básico financiado con impuestos generales que considera una pensión universal que podría llegar ojalá a casi toda la población, y después el clásico pilar histórico del seguro social o de la seguridad social obligatoria. Ahí está la lógica del pay as you go, el sistema de reparto en español, y también podrían entrar en algún sentido los planes ocupacionales que pactan sindicatos con empresarios a través de la negociación colectiva por rama, y en algunos casos existe el reconocimiento de regímenes complementarios privados de capitalización individual, que en algunos países pueden ser obligatorios y en otros voluntarios. En general, uno observa que no son muchos los países en el mundo que tienen regímenes complementarios privados, y menos aún aquellos que han sustituido el pilar público e histórico de seguridad social por estos regímenes privados de capitalización individual. Entonces, ¿qué quiero mostrar con esto? Es que en Chile, hasta este momento, hasta el año 2025, tenemos un sistema, en primer lugar, que fue el primer país en el mundo que privatizó completamente su sistema de pensiones y eliminó el pilar 1, que viene sobre el pilar financiado con impuestos generales. Lo eliminó, lo cercenó. Entonces tenemos un sistema bastante raro, un edificio muy extraño que se cae, ¿no? Porque voy a mostrar por qué se cae. Logramos generar un piso de cobertura mucho mayor, que está llegando al 90% de la población jubilada, antes era un 60%, antes del 2022, y que paga una pensión de alrededor de $230 aproximadamente. No tenemos el pilar público Pay as you go, no tenemos reparto, no tenemos el seguro social, y tenemos un gran pilar de cuentas individuales, donde se aporta 10% de la cotización de los trabajadores, más comisiones de administración, más un seguro que cubre invalidez y sobrevivencia. Y además existe ahorro privado que es premiado por el Estado, que tiene beneficios tributarios. Entonces, este es el sistema que tiene Chile hasta la fecha. Y por eso se explica que ha habido tanta resistencia al modelo chileno. Es un sistema que actualmente, si consideramos los activos que acumulan las instituciones privadas que administran los ahorros de los trabajadores, que se llaman AFP, administradoras de fondos de pensiones, y también las compañías de seguro, que administran los fondos parcialmente cuando se jubilan los trabajadores y optan por una modalidad de renta vitalicia, hoy día acumulan aproximadamente 230.000 millones de dólares, algo así como 80% del Producto Interno Bruto de Chile. Ese es el porcentaje. Y durante la pandemia, en Chile se permitió retirar un porcentaje de los fondos que tenían los trabajadores porque no llegaron a tiempo la ayuda del Estado, y llegamos a tener un 100% del Producto Interno Bruto en activos para jubilación. Si este sistema, ¿no?, que nos parece extraño, completamente privatizado, pagara buenas pensiones, quizás la discusión sería otra, ¿no? Sería una discusión sobre la financialización, cómo eso impacta en distintas aristas de nuestra vida, lo que se mostró en las presentaciones anteriores, en los servicios básicos, en el real estate, etcétera, ¿no? Pero aquí tenemos el gran problema adicional, es que las pensiones que ha pagado el sistema son muy malas. Para que ustedes se hagan una idea, las personas que cotizaron casi toda su vida, cerca de 40 años, y se jubilaron el año 2023 en Chile, la mitad de esas personas obtuvo una tasa de reemplazo, que es el porcentaje de lo que ganaban sus últimos 10 años, que va a obtener como pensión inferior a un tercio, inferior a 32,6%, habiendo ahorrado toda su vida. Entonces, el sistema realmente ha entregado muy malas pensiones, y dado que las rentabilidades van a la baja, esto va empeorando, ¿no? Y dos o tres datos más adicionales. A pesar de que es un sistema completamente privado, las AFP cada año, ¿no?, de 100% de los recursos que van recolectando, que se van depositando en las cuentas individuales, solo ocupan 16 para pagar pensiones, y el 84% restante lo invierten. Entonces, funciona como un sistema pay as you go finalmente, ¿no? Porque se ocupan las cotizaciones actuales para pagar las pensiones, y un porcentaje ínfimo, 16%. Y las pensiones que va pagando el sistema año a año representan un 45% de lo que se recauda cada año. Pero de eso, casi 2/3 lo aporta el Estado a través de subsidios. Entonces estamos hablando no solo de potencialmente un capitalismo de fondos de pensiones u otra denominación, sino que de un sistema privado que se termina apoyándose mayoritariamente en los recursos del Estado, a pesar de que el sistema se había privatizado completamente. Por ello, hoy en día, si consideramos todo el gasto previsional en Chile, incluyendo las Fuerzas Armadas, las pensiones del sistema antiguo, que todavía siguen existiendo en menor medida, y otros beneficios, de cada 100 pesos que se gastan en pensión en Chile, solo 12 los coloca el sistema privado, las AFP y las compañías de seguro, ¿no? Por tanto, es un sistema privado, insisto, subsidiado por el Estado. Y es por eso que este esquema, ¿cierto?, este panorama de muy malas pensiones que van bajando, este panorama donde se va observando que los grandes beneficiados son las AFP, son los distintos grupos económicos donde invierten los dineros las AFP. y son también capitales internacionales, porque en Chile actualmente el 50% de los fondos se invierten en el extranjero. Es que en Chile, desde el 2010, 2011, 2012, se comenzó a organizar un conjunto de sindicatos de manera informal, ¿no? No vinculado a una central formal de trabajadores, sino informalmente, eh, con mucha fuerza desde la Confederación Bancaria de los Trabajadores, del sector financiero, otros sindicatos que se fueron sumando desde el comercio, desde el sector de la salud, desde los empleados públicos. Han habido ciertos momentos más altos y más bajos de adhesión, y hubo una explosión en las movilizaciones del año 2016, ¿no? Donde más de 1 millón de personas salió a las calles a decir no más AFP, no más cuentas individuales. Y es un fenómeno de mucho interés en un país subordinado, periférico, semiperiférico como Chile, que ha sido pionero en la privatización de su sistema de pensiones durante la dictadura, que es algo fundamental, ¿no? Durante la dictadura se pudieron hacer todos estos cambios de manera muy abrupta y muy violenta. Y finalmente lo que tenemos es una resistencia, una oposición, ¿no? Que ha tenido expresiones a lo largo de Chile. La coordinadora ha logrado, ¿cierto?, estructurar espacios en distintos territorios de Chile. Ustedes saben, Chile es un país muy largo, angosto y largo, que tiene cerca de más de 15 regiones, y en cada región, a veces con mayor o menor fuerza, se han constituido espacios de la coordinadora NOMA FP que en momentos de mayor movilización se fortalecen y en momentos de más conservadurismo disminuye, ¿no? Por tanto, es un movimiento que tiene sus vaivenes, que tiene relación con lo que va sucediendo a nivel mundial. En Chile también tenemos una ola de avance de las extremas derechas. También se intentó hacer cambio a la Constitución, donde no prosperó. En Chile hubo un estallido social a fines del año 2019, ¿no?, donde fue el único momento donde se pusieron a hacer pequeños cambios al pilar no contributivo. Pero este movimiento, esta coordinadora de distintos sindicatos que también ha incorporado algunos otros movimientos sociales, todavía existe. Todavía existe, y para terminar la presentación les voy a mostrar que hoy día también se está volviendo a movilizar. La particularidad y lo interesante de este movimiento es que no solo se moviliza clásicamente en las calles, por información, con charlas territoriales, sino que ha desarrollado su propia propuesta alternativa al sistema actual. La primera se lanza el año 2016, una propuesta general para recuperar el sistema de seguridad social para Chile y un sistema Pay as you go y eliminar las AFP, propuesta que es actualizada con mucha mayor información entre el año 2020 y el año 2021. ¿No? Ahí está en el lado izquierdo la propuesta inicial y en el lado derecho la siguiente propuesta, y que también en la institución donde yo represento y trabajo, que es la Fundación Sol, pudimos hacer una modelación actuarial de la propuesta. Vale decir, testearla técnicamente, proyectarla para los próximos 80 años y ver que Chile efectivamente sería viable un sistema con una lógica distinta, un sistema público, con certidumbre, con beneficios definidos, ¿no? Y haciendo frente a los cambios demográficos, a los cambios económicos. Está proyectada, lo pueden descargar ustedes en la página tanto de la coordinadora NOMA FP como de la Fundación Sol, que es un interesante ejercicio que ha permitido debatir políticamente a la coordinadora con los actores, con distintos actores políticos. Actualmente se acaba de aprobar una reforma en Chile, ¿no? Y esto es bastante inédito. Es que un gobierno que teóricamente adhería a la propuesta de la coordinadora NOMA FP terminó haciendo casi lo contrario, ¿no? Vale decir, a pesar de que se entiende que no tenía mayoría en el Congreso, en el Senado y la Cámara de Diputados, de todas maneras no era obligación que impulsara una medida o acordara una medida que terminara profundizando el sistema de cuentas individuales administradas por AFP. ¿Qué se aprobó en Chile? ¿No? Ya se aprobó, acaba de aprobarse, acaba de publicarse la ley y va a comenzar a operar en los próximos meses. Hacer crecer en monto un poco la pensión garantizada universal, que va a pasar de $230 a cerca de $260, con la misma cobertura del 90%. hacer crecer las cuentas individuales que han pagado pésimas pensiones de 10% a 14,5% de cotización, ¿no? Y va a haber un porcentaje que va a ir a una especie de seguro social de manera transitoria. Un punto de cotización va a ir a compensar a las mujeres que por las tablas de mortalidad que diseña el sistema de AFP las discrimina por el hecho de tener una esperanza de vida mayor. Por tanto, este 1% no es en estricto rigor un componente robusto de seguridad social, sino que viene a compensar las discriminaciones del sistema de cuentas individuales. Y finalmente va a haber un punto y medio para mejorar las pensiones de los actuales pensionados, para reparar la deuda histórica parcialmente de los actuales pensionados, un grupo de ellos, quienes hayan cotizado más de 10 años en el caso de las mujeres y más de 20 años en el caso de los hombres, pero ese componente va a ir desapareciendo en el tiempo y va a ir toda la cuenta individual, que va a pasar a ser no 10, no 14,5, sino 16%. Eso significa, ¿no?, que en el régimen va a haber 60% más de recursos para seguir financiarizando la economía chilena, ¿no? Y para invertir también más del 50% de los recursos en el extranjero.
Marco,
¿Sí? Me queda
Marco,
un
we'll just
minuto.
give you one. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Kevin. Just one last minute and we will wrap up, if that's okay.
Exacto, un minuto. Exactamente, eso me quedaba un minuto.
Go ahead
¿no?
and finish.
Ajá. No es por ello, cuando se aprueba esta reforma, el ministro del Trabajo de los años 80, que fue parte de quien creó el sistema AFP, dijo: larga vida al sistema de capitalización individual, celebrando el acuerdo de Leopoldo. Por ello, vemos cómo, ¿cierto?, este movimiento de carácter antisistémico que se opone a la financiarización, a la privatización y quiere recuperar la seguridad social para Chile, nuevamente se ha rearticulado y nuevamente está llamando a marchar, ¿no?, en 4 días más, el 30 de marzo, ¿no?, en una marcha donde nuevamente se convoca a las personas, a pesar de que se hizo una reforma y a pesar de que van a mejorar parcialmente las pensiones, a marchar para recuperar un sistema de pensiones basado en la seguridad. Muchas gracias.
Great. Thank you so much, Marco. As we are close to running out of time, we are just going to give a few closing remarks now, and we will extend past the original meeting time by about 15 minutes, just to save some room for a bit of Q&A. So
Yeah, and maybe just say, we recognize some people may have to leave if there's a time limit, and some people may leave the Zoom, but because we lost a bit of time at the beginning and we're a little bit short on time, we're just going to extend 10, 15 minutes past 4, if that's okay. And yeah, so we're going to, as Lauren says, we're going to just offer our kind of closing remarks now and then do the Q&A, just because people may have to leave. The main closing remark, I guess 2 that I wanted to share, is first of all, an announcement of our next event. This project that organized today is planning a next webinar, another international webinar in May, and I'm going to invite my colleague, either Monica or Devlin, who is from Grain, I think it's Monica because she just clicked, to just say a quick word announcing the content of that event and maybe the schedule. Are you on, Monica?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me well? Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Bueno, yes, on behalf of Grain, wanted to really thank everyone, no, for the webinar, to the panelists. Sorry, I hear myself twice. I don't know. Okay. And yes, as Kevin was saying, we're very soon going to launch a second webinar, no? And the title would be Fighting Off Vulture Finance in the Asia Pacific. And the goal will be to share research and information, and also to consider collective strategies, no? And the actions that we can address in order to address the growing presence of financial actors. That webinar will not only focus on pension funds, but also include a reflection on private equity firms and sovereign wealth funds, and focus in the Asia Pacific region. People invited there, will include, for example, groups that are already active in these issues, but also groups that are interested in learning more about them. No, the date will be either the 22nd or the 24th of May at 3 p.m. Indonesian time, but it will be finally confirmed very soon and available in the website of the project, as well as shared in social media and shared to all the participants of this webinar. So yeah, that's all from my side. Thanks again.
Great.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Monica. And now Kevin or I will offer some closing remarks.
Well, just the one I wanted to mention, this is for people in the room and online, along with the webinar that Monica just mentioned, we've got plans to do other activities, research, publications. We now have a blog on that website we hope to use. So for those that are interested to hear what else is in the works and what's coming, there is now a sign-up subscription system on our website. We'll put it in the chat and we'll circulate it here in the room. It's basically carleton.ca financialization lab, / financialization lab is the website. And there's a subscribe here button at the top of the menu, but we will circulate this. So stay tuned. We have plans, as you can see from the content. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to grapple with. It's very serious. Some of it's very ugly, but it merits thoughtful, strategic political response. And that was my closing remarks. Did you have? I can't remember if you were going to add anything.
No, I think that's about it.
Yeah. So now we'll go Q&A.
Yeah, I'll send the link into the chat for everybody to have access to. We'll now turn to the Q&A. For just the structure of this, because we have some people joining us in person, some people online, we will alternate between questions from the chat and taking questions from those here with us in person. We're going to start with a round of questions, the chat. Any questions that you have? Sorry, we'll just ask everyone to unmute or to mute themselves if possible.
Are there any right off the bat? Otherwise, we can go into the room. How do we do that?
Yes. All right. So we're seeing no questions right off the bat in the chat. So I'll invite everyone in the room. If you have any questions for any of the panelists, we will share them with the audience.
Comments?
Yes.
Okay, then. So I tend to think of these things in more structural terms, in terms of how do we pull the blocks from the foundation of this edifice that is causing so much damage. But I also can't help but get caught up in some of the details. And I'm thinking, and maybe this is something that Jason can comment on, but we've got a weird situation in terms of disclosure and reporting in Canada with 13 different jurisdictions governing corporate disclosure. And I know I've noticed that if you're looking for disclosure and you've got a company that's dual listed in the United States, you go to the United States because you get much better disclosure. But they also have a thing called enforcement in the States, which we don't have here. And I mean, in the last couple of years, there's been some movement on beneficial ownership disclosure. We've had the Extractive Sector Transparency Measures Act for extractives, not for services or anything else, but And it has been limitations. But, you know, around the beneficial ownership in particular, there was a lot of media around snow washing and, you know, the fact that someone can be barred from participating in securities in BC and just go to Calgary and start all over again. So the only thing I can think of, and this is the question, is what happens if we really focus on redefining that as fraud? That, you know, misstating your financials is not like a minor administrative problem. There's some sort of threshold where it's like, no, I'm sorry, that is fraud, and it's prosecuted as a crime and therefore federal, and we don't need to get through the jurisdictional Balkans that we've got set up.
Good point. Can you just say who you are, Jamie? Just
My name's Jamie Nean. I'm with Mining Watch Canada. And you know, the thing that Jim Flaherty didn't manage to do is on side with a single securities regulator.
take one more from the room.
Yeah, if there are any other questions for the room.
One more from the room.
Hi, folks. My name's Abram. I'm one of Kevin's, well, you're retired, but I think of you as a colleague at the Canadian Union of Public Employees. So a former senior investment executive for Brookfield Asset Management is the current and likely to be reelected prime minister. And if you read
Potentially.
and if you read the sort of business press around pension funds and pension fund management, there's a lot of buzz about, you know, why don't Canadian pension funds invest in Canadian infrastructure? This is very patriotic of us during the, you know, our trade disputes with the United States. The reason pension funds have historically tended not to invest in Canada is the type of infrastructure that speakers have talked about pension funds liking to prey upon is still, for the most part, publicly owned in Canada. And my question, I guess, mainly for our colleagues at CICTAR, but I think any of the panelists could speak to this, is, you know, I can see a possibility where there is a big push for pension funds to start investing in Canada and start implementing some of these business practices that they've refined abroad within Canada. My concern is, you know, as the global north and even the labor movement in the global north, we can be kind of small-minded and not think of our problems as connected to global issues and global solidarity. So in terms of building solidarity between workers in Canada who might be seeing their workplaces bought out by pension funds and, you know, using leveraged buyouts and these kind of things, and workers in the global south who have already experienced this and already have experience fighting back, what are some sort of effective forums and effective tools for that? Thank you.
Jason.
Great, thank you. Yeah, well, if any of the panelists want to jump in, but I know Jason, you were mentioned on that first question. That will be our first round of questions from the room. So I'll turn it over to any responses.
Great. Yeah. So I think as my colleague and comrade Livy said, I mean, that lack of transparency in Canada is a huge problem. There is good data from both the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative and the mandatory disclosure. There is good data on mining companies, and I think we actually should be trying to use that a lot more to highlight the abuses of Canadian companies on their global operations, particularly in Latin America. I think, I don't know how widely known, but essentially Nova Scotia is the Delaware of Canada. And there's not good disclosure in any particular province, but Nova Scotia appears to be where you go if you want to hide what you're doing. So one solution that we want to push for that we've won here in Australia is public country by country reporting. And we have passed that legislation as the best multinational tax transparency in the world. Any Canadian multinational that has over 10 million Australian dollars in turnover will be required to report on all of its number of employees, revenues, taxes paid, in 40 countries around the world that are widely considered to be tax havens. So we hope that that legislation can be moved in Canada and in other jurisdictions as well. And we're sort of promoting that as a model, and obviously want to see that as a global standard. I think it's very possible to push the Canadian public pension funds to live up to what they say they are doing and to be transparent and open and practice good governance standards. They're clearly failing on that. And there's so much more information that they should publish on their own operations, but also on their portfolio companies all around the world. I'll just comment briefly on the second question as well. I mean, I think that there are, you know, I would like to see a different version of pension funds and then to capitalism, but that's not happening in the short term. Well, maybe in the longer term we can push in that direction. But I do think that there's lots of pressure in the short term that Canadian public pension funds should be forced to focus on actual productive assets, not maximizing rent extraction, right? So there's a common habit of buying water utilities, which some have failed miserably in terms of the long-term assets, in terms of the public. But, you know, if you want to invest in new public transport systems, you can make money on that and do it in a way that benefits society. So I think, you know, there's a difference between buying assets for monopoly control and rent extraction versus actually building new capacity and improving services. So there are ways for those pension funds to invest in Canada, in public transport, or in things that are advancing renewable energy production in a positive way, rather than owning airports and gouging customers and businesses at the same time in order to maximize short-term profits.
Great, thank you so much, Jason. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to move to some of the chat questions, just so we can get as many answered as possible. So we'll start with a question from Clarice. This question is for Livy. Clarice says, Livy, do you or Sigtar have a position on the Brazilian tax reform under the current Lula government, which has been criticized by left-wing sectors for a lack of popular participation? I'm going to read out all of the questions first, just so we can get through them as quickly as possible. And I have to read them out just so that they are translated. The next question is from Peter. Is it feasible to halt rapacious financialization by pension funds as long as workers remain dependent on private financial markets to secure their retirement? Our final question is a question/comment from Lois.
Luis.
Luis.
No, it is Lois. Yeah.
I believe some of our pension funds are investing in agricultural land in Western Canada, as well as around the world, and driving up the price of ag land for local farmers and displacing local farmers. Speculation on agricultural land is a huge issue in Canada and elsewhere. And then we have one last question from Tamara. What do the speakers feel is the role of Canadian public sector unions in holding public sector funds accountable to trade union priorities?
So if we could, Lauren, I know we're tight on time. We're at 4:10. We've got 5 minutes left, and I don't think we should push past 4:15. So if it's okay with you, I would like to insert myself and take a quick stab at responding to Peter's question, which is specifically like the connection of workers to this whole problematic. And then maybe we could invite any of our speakers to take up the others. I just want to say briefly, Peter is asking about, like, can we really grapple with this as long as workers actually have become dependent? Many workers in Canada, including members of the CPP, and in other countries, are dependent on these profits, on these and this particular structure of maximal squeezed profits. And of course, for me, that is the point, and it is a central part of the problem that is extremely difficult to resolve without a major structural change. So, at the risk of self-promotion, I will share that I actually have written one article specifically on this question, and it was a co-authored chapter with Sam Gindin, who some of you may know, It's the last chapter in a book we did in 2018 called The Contradictions of Pension Fund Capitalism. And the chapter tried to set out what it would look like in Canada to establish a non-financialized pension system. And in brief, what does that look like? It really means an expanded old age security system, which is not engaged with the financial markets. We already have a non-financialized OAS, and a return of the CPP to its original structure, which was not financialized. The challenge, though, is that both of those plans are way too small. They're inadequate. So they would need to be doubled at least to actually deliver adequate pensions. Do we have the political will and movement and power to double those things? No, we don't currently, but that's my quick response to Peter with this excellent question that I think we all need to grapple with.
Great, thank you, Kevin. And yes, if any of the other speakers would like to tackle those other three questions.
Maybe Lee.
Can I go? Just quickly, I have, Ewan was very kindly put my blog post on the tax reform in Brazil. So if you guys want to see my position on that with a little more time, is there. But on a nutshell, I think the proposition is very good. It is still timid, like it lacks popular support, as Clarice was saying. But it does answer to all the progressive reforms that we are asking as civil society in Brazil for years. So it does have some popular support, even if it's more from the organized civil society. But it does try to put a cap on all these problems of in Brazil, mostly the problem is dividends that are not taxed. So that's how the super rich don't have any taxes to pay. And in more general terms, the other questions, I think, in terms of getting the corporations to do it better, regulation is the key. Of course, we need to change the whole system. Capitalism is a huge problem in its stage right now, but I think in terms that we can think of step-by-step reforms, the country-by-country reporting, legislation that Jason was talking about, it would change the game here in Brazil if we had it. So I think that's some of the things in Canada as well. It would change a lot. So we would see Canada's investments all around the world and how much they're paying in terms of their tax liabilities all over the world in tax havens. So I think we need to put a cap on corporate greed on regulations. I think that's the way, if we think about reforming capitalism and not revolution at this moment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Libby. I think we're right at 4:15 basically. So unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, everybody online, everybody in person. Thank you. I should have added to the interpreters who were only lined up until 4 o'clock our time, and we just dragged forward 15 minutes. Muchas gracias. Merci beaucoup to the interpreters. And I think with that, we'll close it up. We will be in touch. We will email you all copies of a link to the video, the chat, and updates, what's coming. Thank you all.